Scott from Bench Prep. If you can hear me, can you just go ahead and type in the chat box just a yes for me? Awesome, perfect. Thank you so much. Seems like the audio is working. We're going to go ahead and get started. Our agenda for today, same as all of our previous webinars. John is going to be going through our Ask the Expert review. We'll have some time for an open Q&A at the end, and then we'll save a little bit of time to wrap up just at the very end. One thing to note before we get started, this is the last webinar in our spring webinar series. Before the webinar, or during the webinar, or afterwards, if you get a chance, we'd love for you to like Bench Prep HR on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and join our LinkedIn group. All you need to do is search Bench Prep HR, and you will be able to find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. We'd love to be able to interact with you. Please go ahead and join us in any of those social media. Today's instructor is John Newton. For those of you who have been following along with Bench Prep, you've seen John's videos, you've heard him lead several other webinars for us. John holds the SPHR designation. He's an instructor not just for Bench Prep, but also for DePaul University and Northern Illinois University. He is an HR practitioner, a consultant with his own firm, John Newton & Associates, covering a whole range of industries. John is Bench Prep's resident HR expert. We're always so lucky to have him here with us. Today is no different from that. A few things to note before I hand it off to John to get started. One, this webinar is being recorded. The slides and the webinar recording will be made available to you in the Bench Prep course. To find this webinar recording or any other recordings, all you'll need to do is go to the lessons section of the course and scroll all the way to the bottom. Once again, that's the lessons section of the course, and then scroll all the way to the bottom. One thing to note about once John jumps on, he might be asking you some questions throughout the course of the webinar, asking you to respond within the chat box. If you have any specific questions on the content, please hold those until the end when John has that open Q&A period. It can get a little hard to keep track of any questions in the comments, so just please hold any of those specific questions in the chat box unless John asks you to say something. Otherwise, that's really it from me, Scott. I will be back at the end to answer any questions you might have about the Bench Prep technology itself. John will be answering any HR content questions that you may have, but otherwise I'm going to turn it over to John right now. There might be just a few seconds of lag in between when I jump off the audio and John gets on, but otherwise we'll be good to go, and I will see you all back on here at the end. Thanks so much.
Hello, this is John. If you can hear me, please let me know. Hello, if my voice is coming through, folks, can someone type in? I don't think it is, though. Oh, it looks like it is. Fantastic. Okay, that's confirming you're hearing me. Elaine, I think I can hear you. That's John. Okay, fantastic. Thanks, everybody. Again, we apologize for the couple of minutes delay as we're just kind of figuring out a technology piece to bring us to you this afternoon. So thanks so much for joining. And Scott, I appreciate the handoff. In addition to what Scott said, one thing to clarify for everybody is the primary focus of today is to address questions that you've brought to us. And so recently, Bench Prep made it available to send what do you want to know questions, and so that's where this list comes from. In addition, we've added a couple of questions that we thought, hey, if you had asked, in other words, we'd love for you to know, and as no one asked, we just added those as well. So we have quite a few things to cover, so let's just dive into it. Here we go. First of all, when we say to ask the expert, I just would like Bench Prep to send a note to my family because they're the only ones who call me an expert, so I appreciate that. But anyhow, that aside, let's go ahead and start answering your questions as we go along. If you have a question about the question, I'm going to ask that you hold those. Time permitting, I might stop once or twice along the way to say, okay, clarifying on any of the things we've spoken to thus far. But if not, then just hold those, and as Scott said at the end, we'll do another chance to speak to any of these. So the first question that we're looking at here, are there any negative points for any wrong answers on the certification exam? And the answer to that is no, there are not. As a matter of fact, you want to answer everything because you don't get credit if you don't answer something, but you will of course get credit if you get it right. So it's always best to at least attempt an answer. Question number 2, are there questions regarding formulas on the exam? I have heard mixed answers on this. So here's what I would encourage you to think about. First of all, there are different questions for, different people. There's a bank of questions on the certification exam. So we can't guarantee that you won't have a formula question. But what I can pretty strongly speak to is that the types of math questions they ask, and that's really where we're going with this, are pretty straightforward. So I would not really encourage you to spend hours of your brain time trying to memorize some of these complicated formulas. The things that I'd want you to understand are basic things like how to do mean, median, mode, a weighted average, maybe a basic return on investment, or perhaps a ratio. A ratio is just when you come up with typically a percentage answer. But other than that, I know that periodically in materials you'll see through Bench Prep or even in your own outside research, you'll see some of these super complicated formulas. And I just, I suppose you may have something bubble up, but the likelihood of that is pretty slim. When I anecdotally asked my students, talk to me about the math, what I'm hearing people are saying there was 0, John, and the most I've ever heard is 5 questions out of the entire bank of questions that they see on their exam. So I would not worry about that. So that's kind of a mixed answer from the person that answered that, but I think it kind of gives you a sense of how you might prepare for the math on the exam. Question 3, I remember this question on the pre-test. If an employee writes technical instructions, policies and procedures, manuals, or even email responses as part of their required duties, who owns it? Let's say hypothetically that copyright agreements were never arranged or discussed. Okay, so basically it doesn't matter if copyright was discussed or not. There's this concept of what we call work for hire, and what that means is basically when you are an employee of a company, anything you create on behalf of that employer, they own. The exception to that would be something that's created that is so outside of the responsibilities of your job that you just did that maybe you would have an argument in the courts for why the employer doesn't own it. But even that would require court intervention, because fundamentally when you're hired by the employer and you're exposed to the employer protected information as well as using their computers and things like that, almost always this work for hire concept holds, which is the employer owns it. Question 4, can someone tell me if closed shops are illegal? According to the Taft-Hartley Act, employers may not form closed shop agreements with unions, but I thought they could. So here's how I want you to understand this. It's less about are they illegal or legal, because there's not really yes or no questions on the certification exam, and at this point that's what you want to be focusing on. So I want you to understand primarily what a closed shop is. And so again, if you're not doing this, you'll likely want to be taking some notes. I'm going to throw lots of stuff at you in the next 30-40 minutes here. What is a closed shop in the union world? It says that in order for you to even be considered as a hire, you must be a member of the union already. So we're not even going to let you start on day 1 if you're not already a member. That's a closed shop. to this question, the courts have pretty much shot the closed shop down, with some very rare exception in sort of the construction industry, where the level of knowledge and skill that someone has to have on day one is so critical, which would be why they could join that union in the first place, which is why closed shop might still be allowed. But fundamentally, as long as you recognize that a closed shop says you must be a member of the union before you start with us, I think that will help you on your exam. You also want to remember what a union shop is. Now, you've got some notes on this, but I'm just going to give it to you now. A union shop says we're going to only in certain positions, you must be a union member within a short period of time from when you start with us. So in other words, we would hire anybody, but within 30 days or so, you must then join that union. Both closed shops and union shops are found in your non-right to work states, because remember, a right to work state says that you are indeed not complied. You have the right to work there without being compelled to be a union member. Agency shop, I'm just giving you a little training now here, folks. Agency shop does not require employees to join the union, but they have to pay an equivalent fee because very often they're still being represented by the unions. So an agency shop, you're not required to join the union, but you're paying a fee. These are also similar to closed shop. The courts often say, hey, not so much anymore, because if you're making them pay a fee, you might as well make them join the union, and you can't really make them join a union, but that's fundamentally what an agency shop is. And then an open shop, the term there means anybody can work in the positions. They don't have to be a union member, for what it's worth. So that's just a little extra training moment. I won't do a ton of that, but I think that people kind of look at those, and now I've given you some definitions on that. Question number 5, does anyone know if it is necessary to remember the years the laws were established? My short answer would be no. My longer answer would be sometimes knowing the years can be valuable when it helps you put a context to the law. So Title VII of the Civil Rights Act 1964, we are in the process of, civil rights was just huge in our country in the 60s. And so sometimes knowing the dates help you, but typically the certification exam will not dive into what year was a law created, because where's the value ultimately, right, in your job as an HR professional? Now, before you all start typing and saying, but bench prep asks us, yes, we do. Our bank of questions want to assure that you are doing all of the research and getting all of the context as possible. So one way we assure that is asking some of those more in-depth year laws were created questions. But on your certification exam, you'll be able to let the years the laws were created go. And again, folks, little bench prep and John Newton disclaimer. This is as it's been reported to us by students, by HRCI, by our own research as of today. But as questions are always being developed, you could come across a test question that's in the reliability validity testing, which is it doesn't count towards your score, but they're trying it out. That might be something new and different. So I always tell people, if something's asked that you weren't anticipating or you really thought wasn't going to be on it, just assume it's a practice question that HRCI is maybe going to include for credit on a future certification exam. All right, questions for the PHR. Well, I need to know statistics and trends. I've seen a lot of this in the business management and strategy section. Thanks. Now, I have to be honest, I'm not entirely certain what this person is referencing. If it gets back to the general question about formulas and math, I think I've already answered it on a previous question, but if it's a little outside of that, the only thing I would say is you certainly want to know what trend analysis is, right? When we look at, what's been going on trend-wise as far as turnover rates or, new customers and things like that. So understanding why we look at metrics, and that's what BMS, Business Management and Strategy, does. It helps you understand why taking a look at different metrics makes us stronger HR professionals. So it's less about the math, it's more about understanding why we would look at some of these items. Okay, this is a long one, but we'll try and go through it pretty quickly here. Dabney is the HR manager for his employer. He has been asked to write an employee handbook to provide all the organization's policies in writing. What will employees be able to assume about the handbook policies? A, handbook policies are only guidelines and they will offer general instruction about how to treat things like vacation and leaves of absence. You could, when you're answering this in the certification exam, I always think about, is it possible, yes or no? Handbook policies are only guidelines. I get a little nervous with the word only and general instruction, but I wouldn't necessarily cross that out yet. B, Dabney should write the handbook so policies are acceptable to most employees. There will always be some exceptions to the rules. This one should be an obvious red flag to you. Acceptable to most employees. What does that even mean? The employees don't get to choose what they like and don't like. So I'd put a line through that right away. C, the policies are requirements. All managers and employees should use them consistently, or there can be complaints of illegal discrimination. Well, this one is a little trickier, but I'd put a line through this because the end complaints of illegal discrimination seems to take you off on a sort of an odd note. I understand from a consistent standpoint, but I just don't like the way that one is. So I'd put a line through that. D, with provisions for exceptions to be approved by senior management, Dabney can be confident that the handbook policies will be applied by all the managers in his organization. Certainly sounds strong. There are exceptions to handbooks, and but other than that are made clear along the way by management. But other than that, we're going to apply consistently. So I'd go between D and A, and really when I go back to A, our only guidelines, I don't like it. I put a line through it, so that's where I go with D. I know that the person who asked this question kind of asked about Dabney's confidence. I think they're over thinking the confidence standpoint and just focusing on, will the employees, because what will they assume about the handbook? They're going to assume I got to follow them because Dabney rolled them out. And that's the same way of saying Dabney can be confident. So D, final answer. And the reason I walk through that, folks, is that's how I want you to answer your questions on the exam. If you're not sure which ones kind of maybe stay as possibilities and which one just don't feel right. Number 8, does anyone know how important it is to know the abbreviations for the laws, acts, programs, etc.? I think you definitely want to understand the acronyms. In perfect grammar and certification exam providers would do this as well. The first time they use an acronym, they name it, like Family Medical Leave Act, parentheses, FMLA. And I think that happens a lot, but some of the acronyms today of the laws are pretty common today. So it's possible you won't always see their acronyms of the laws and what have you. So yes, I'd have you take a look at them, but I wouldn't have you spend a ton of time. I mean, really, the ones that you'll likely see are like ADA, American Discrimination Act, ADEA, Age Discrimination Employment Act. So that's how I do it. I'm all about don't spend quality content learning time on things that are highly unlikely to impact you. I do know in bench prep we ask questions with just the acronyms, but again, that's really driving you to make sure you're looking at everything. And number 9, can someone who has taken the SPHR exam please advise if there are questions on case law applying to employee and labor relations? So bottom line, I think the question I'm going to expand that is, do you need to know the cases of the exam? And the answer is absolutely. However, typically, the certification exam will mention a case as it supports a content question. So in other words, even if you didn't know the case, you could still likely answer the question that they're asking. The case is just sort of an extra clue to what you might be looking at. So what I tell people is make sure you do review your cases. Yes, there are a lot, but the cases are presented in a manner to help you remember concepts. Griggs versus Duke Power equals adverse impact. So that's how I would want you to understand the cases. I know bench prep will sometimes say which case said what, but it's the only way we can guarantee that our students like yourself are at least looking at those cases. I will tell you, a decade ago, when yours truly was taking these exams, on a regular basis, before now I take them, but I'm already certified, of course, they used to ask a lot more case law. That seems to have been backed away from. And question number 10, in lesson payrolling, what's the difference between payrolling and temporary workers? So here's what payrolling is. Payrolling is when the employer finds potential employees, so candidates that they like, and then they refer them to these staffing agencies, and then the staffing agency staffs them back to us. Versus when you work with general staffing agencies, whether it be temporary or even long-term, they find the people, then they bring them to us. So payrolling is when we, the employer, find qualified candidates, but instead of us putting them on our payroll and having all the administrative burden, we then bring them to a staffing agency that we have a relationship with, and then we lease them back from them. Okay, I'm going to take about 2 minutes here and just see on any of the questions we've spoken to right now, is there any clarifying things I can, before I move into our next batch here. So I'm giving you permission to type something about the top 10 that we've just looked at. And while I wait to see if anyone types, Victoria mentions possibly a compa ratio. I would agree that maybe compa ratio would show up in some sort of mathematical analysis, but what they're really looking for in compa ratio on the exam is, do you understand what it is? So a compa ratio looks at the midpoint of what the market is paying. And so how I tell people how you can really walk your way through that answer any way you look at it is, if you're at 100% compa ratio, which means you're matching whatever they're paying in the market, you are a match payroll person. If your compa ratio is above 100% or above the whole number 1, you pay more than market. And if your compa ratio is below 100% or the whole number 1, you pay less than market. So again, you may have a compa ratio, although I've asked a lot of students and they remember more conceptually than actual math on that. All right, other than that, I don't see any other questions popping about the first 10, so I will continue. But I'm going to ask if one or two of you could just put a thumbs up or a yes that you're still hearing me. I just have a different audio approach today, and I want to make sure. Oh, thanks, Lacey. Thanks, everybody. I'm starting to just get nervous because of my own audio stuff. Fabulous. Thanks, everyone. Okay, let's move on then. Question 11 here. I'm totally blanking on what the term is for when an employee reports into managers. For example, a sales staff at one of the company's branch offices reporting into the sales manager and also the branch director or manager. There is an HR term for this that is eluding me at the moment. Please help. And first of all, don't worry about blanking. That's normal. It happens to all of us. It's maybe has already come back to you. I believe what you are referencing is a matrix reporting structure, M-A-T-R-I-X reporting structure. What that is when an employee has 2 reporting managers. Maybe it's a plant manager and then a project manager. And so what you want to remember for your exam is matrix is dual straight line reporting. It means shared responsibilities for that employee by 2 managers. Where they'll try and get you sometimes is one of the answers would be a dotted line reporting, which means sort of a unofficial reporting. That's not matrix. Matrix is straight line to 2 managers, and they both equally share in management responsibilities of that employee. Question 12, can anyone clarify for test purposes which act is the prevailing wage act, Walsh-Healy or Davis-Bacon? And the answer is both. So I'm less about knowing, the details of each law, is more about, do you understand what prevailing wage is? Prevailing wage says what is the going rate for that type of position and benefits offered to that type of position in the community where the position is being hired and worked. And what this is both Walsh-Healy and Davis-Bacon deal with any employer that has a federal contract, and they insert in there, you must pay prevailing wages. So we can't negotiate a lower rate if we're receiving money from the government to hire people. The government says you can't lowball them. As a reminder, Walsh-Healy deals with manufacturers and suppliers of goods in excess of $10,000. And then the Davis-Bacon Act is construction projects of $2,000 or more. Less likely they'll get to that nuance, more likely they want you to remember prevailing wages. Question 13, we talk about geographic-based differential pay. What are the geographically dependent elements? What they're really looking for there, folks, is when you hire a cashier at McDonald's in Downers Grove, Illinois, and you hire a cashier at McDonald's in downtown San Francisco, California, the geographic-based differential pay just looks at that. What's the cost of living difference? There's no legal determined geographic-based differential, but typically employers look at literally cost of living. How is it 17% more expensive in San Francisco, so we're going to add on to someone's pay 17%. But an employer can choose to look at multiple factors that determines geography, but typically it's, what's it cost to live, what's it cost to pay for gas, what's it cost for transportation, things like that. Question 14, compliance evaluations. How do I determine if an affirmative action plan is required for my organization? Now, I can't really take time to do a whole affirmative action training, and particularly, I think this person really means for their exam versus their own organization. If you mean it for your own organization, there's a couple of things I'd say. Go look at some of the materials on what really requires compliance with AA. Also look at your contracts that you have with the federal government, because that's really, it would say right on there if your affirmative action required or not. But for your exam, what you simply want to remember is almost all federal contractors fall under affirmative action. The rule of thumb, that's one barometer, is 50 or more employees and the contract's $50,000 or more. I think that's likely the answer they'll go to. That being said, there are some exceptions where it could be as small as $10,000 or more. Typically, anything under a $10,000 federal contract would not require an affirmative action plan. Question 15, could someone please help me understand how the Delphi technique is used in a process flow analysis? As stated, I review the Delphi technique in the workforce planning and employment, which states that the Delphi technique is unethical method of determining the future outcome and then manipulating a group to reach that conclusion. Okay, TQM, so on and so forth. Here's how I can answer this in our limited time together as a question answer. I just want you to understand what the Delphi technique is. So there are qualitative and quantitative ways to do research. The Delphi technique is a qualitative way. In other words, it's not using hard data numbers, but it's looking for professional subjectivity. So there's three approaches one could use. They could do what's called managerial estimates, the Delphi technique, or the nominal group technique. And all of these are gathering information from certain sources, asking questions, going back and forth. Managerial estimates is just that. Ask your managers, what do they think we're going to need? perhaps as it relates to hiring. The Delphi technique is an electronic form of brainstorming. And so if you think of using SurveyMonkey, or if you think of using even email, and what it is it's going back and forth. It's asking a group of people, typically your employee set or a group, a subset within, some questions. You gather their answers, then you typically generate another list of questions based on their answers. And that's what Delphi technique is. And so in a process flow, it's part of the data gathering piece. What the book might be referencing when they talk about unethical is if it's done in a manner that you're not getting honest responses. You're asking the type of questions that no person is legitimately going to respond to without fear of retaliation. I think that's where it gets a little dicey, but the Delphi technique is a manner that's been around for years. The nominal group technique really is Delphi, but face-to-face. So it's the same concept of get a group of people, answer some questions, then maybe follow-up questions based on what they say, but instead of doing it electronically, you do it in person, face-to-face. Question 16 from lesson quality initiatives. How are conformance requirements and performance standards different from one another? First, I got to tell you, I'm not entirely certain you got to worry too much about what conformance requirements are, but if you did, I would say think compliance. Are we acting in a way that meets compliance requirements or measurements? Whereas performance standards really speak a little bit more to what are the behaviors that are acceptable and unacceptable, and what are the objectives that we're trying to achieve. That's how I would have you recognize the difference between the two. Question 17 from the lesson HR interventions overview. What is the difference between a macro level intervention and an operational one? Again, I think that how I would have you remember this on your exam, because that's certainly where we're all driving to. Think of macro as really touching the entire organization. So a good example of a macro HR intervention would be a culture intervention. Here's our stated culture, here's our lived culture, it's a disconnect, what are we going to do about it? When you think about operational one, that's typically sort of that day-to-day piece, or anything that really drives with getting a product or service created and out to market. So maybe we could say all employees involved with that component, you know, building, getting a product out or a service out. An intervention might be, we want you, every time you see an area of improvement potential, we want you to report that to HR for the next 6 months, for example. So that's the little different. Macro likely includes a little bit larger group, you know, really your entire organization. Okay, I'll pause here for one moment to see if any questions on this next group that we saw that anyone wants clarification on. Just pause for a moment. Okay, I don't see any typings, so we'll make use of our time. And question 19. Oh, did I skip question 18? I'm sorry. Question 18, does anyone know how important it is to know the abbreviations for the laws, acts, programs, etc.? If that looks like a repeat, it is. We wanted to just address it because these were typed into our list. And once again, you know, take a look at the acronyms, but don't spend hours and hours and hours memorizing them. Not great value. Question 19, can someone explain the difference between a closed shop clause and a union shop clause? I understand the closed shop clauses are when you must join the union. Okay, I'm not going to even finish reading that. We addressed this very similarly question before. So let me just kind of do a reminder, because I do think that people get a little stuck on this. The things you want to remember, the difference between a right to work state and a non-right to work state. A right to work state says you can't be compelled to join a union to work in a position at a company. A non-right to work state says you can be compelled to be a union member to work at certain positions within companies. Closed shop, we only hire union workers. Very limited ability to do that based on common law, court case decision. Sometimes you might still see it in the construction or trade world. Union shop, we require you to be a member of the union within a short period of time after you start with us if you're not already. Both of those you would see in a non-right to work shop. Agency shop, we don't require you to work, or I'm sorry, we don't require you to join the union, but you might still be compelled to pay union dues. So therefore, you would technically be able to see those in a right to work, but what common law says, in a right to work, when we're saying you don't have to join a union, an agency shop certainly feels like you're joining a union. So common law typically says, if they were even allowed, and they're very rarely, the court cases are shooting them down, it'd be a non-right to work. And open shop, you don't have to join a union to be employed with us. And certainly you'd see those in right to work. But before I move on, folks, read your question thoroughly, because in a non-right to work state, we could still have an employer that's an open shop that says, we're not going to make you join the union to work with us. And number 20, do we need to memorize all the court cases or just understand the different types of court cases? I think we explained that already in a previous question. Read through the court cases. Particularly if they discuss a content piece that you're not clear on, then go find that content. But I think the court cases become just clues to answers, but not necessarily a make or break it to being able to answer a question on the actual certification exam. 21. I came across a couple of questions while practicing a practice test. Please help me understand the questions. So here's what I wanted to, I left this one in here for a reason. Bench prep, we purchase with some due diligence a bank of 2,000 plus questions that you all have access to. Are there some incredible additional resources out there? Absolutely. Can we speak to the reliability and validity of those questions and answers in bench prep? No. It's outside of the scope of what we are committed to offering you. So one of you asked, with good reason, hey, here's a couple of questions I found outside of bench prep, but could you address them? We're not able to address them officially as bench prep because, one, we don't even know for sure what they stated the answers were. Those weren't provided to us, at least that we could see. And two, not knowing who drafted these, it's really difficult to say if they're reliable and valid questions. So I wanted to use this as a reminder to all of you. Certainly feel free to go outside of the bench prep scope if you want to find more practice questions, but make sure you do your own due diligence that these are coming from good sources. This particular question, I think it's pretty straightforward, but unless whoever drafted it is coming from a whole different place, what occurs when individuals who quit, die, or retire are not replaced? That's attrition. That's just natural attrition. The turnover of employees, not caused by a formal downsize, not caused by one employer buying out another company, not caused by a hiring freeze, which is when we just don't bring new people on board. So I think that one's pretty straightforward, but again, I don't want to break my own rule and go too depth on a non-bench prep question. Okay, now I'm going to spend about 5 minutes before we throw it back to all of you on some things we wanted you to also know. But before I do that, I will pause. Is there any clarification on any of the first 20 questions that we saw? Now's your chance to type that in as well. All right, then what I've done with Scott and Emily and Katie and the rest of the team at Bench Prep is provided you a couple of bonus questions had you asked to really prepare you from here to your exam and things. So I'm going to go through a list. If you're taking notes furiously, I think these will help you. I have found as an instructor these have been quite valuable based on student feedback. So here we go, rather. So the first one is, hey John, any tips on answering exam questions? So here's some things I want to reinforce for all of you. Don't change your answer unless you found something in another test question that triggered your response, or you missed a keyword when reading it. Test-taking studies show us your first answer is almost always your best answer. Some keywords you might want to look for in a test answer. If you're really struggling between two answers, these keywords often are helpful. And I'll repeat these for those of you panicking because it's fast. Communication, alignment, strategic, training, senior executive buy-in, quick corrective action, culture. One more time. Communication, alignment, strategic, training, senior executive buy-in, quick corrective action, culture. If you see those as the answer, as one of the answers, and you're not sure, you're debating between two, those are always good go-to answers. So it's just kind of a little shorthand cheat sheet if you're struggling. Always read the question, then attempt to answer it in your mind before reading the actual potential answers. Even put your hand over the screen if you need to. It gives you a sense of, do I think I know what the answer is, before you look at the possible answers. Then read each possible answer thoroughly and see, is there a connection between what you thought the answer was and what they're giving you as an option of an answer. Think like a business owner or a senior HR executive first. In other words, we sometimes think too junior when answering the test questions, regardless of the level you're sitting for. So think about a business owner or a senior HR exec first when answering questions, unless they say, how would a generalist respond, for example. Don't read your questions too fast. There is no award or reward for finishing your exam first. Take the time you need. From here to the exam, what should you be doing? Okay, use the flashcards that Bench Prep offers you. Take as many exams, retake them as possible. And if they become rote to you, then do what I've recommended. Put your hand over the potential answers and see if you could talk through what the answer is, so you're not just saying B. If you can get yourself into a study group, it never hurts. Talk to, and you can use our discussion boards as many study groups as well, but I like literally the in-person or on the phone when you're asking each other questions and making each other teach to each other. From here to your exam date, I want you to put your hands or your eyes on each functional area every single week. I encourage you to do 5 days a week out of 7 studying, 2 a day. Maybe a half hour in the morning, a half hour in the evening. It's like training for the marathon. You want to keep your brain muscle fresh and retention focused. Whatever your plan is, stick to it. And most students say, thank goodness you forced me to have a plan, or why didn't I listen to you and have a study plan? Because it's too easy to get sidetracked. When you're taking practice exams, try and have annoyances. Let things bug you that you still have to focus. Give your spouse or your partner or your children the ability to make noise, and you just keep focusing on the exam and don't get distracted. On your last week of your study before your actual exam, if you need to, then eliminate pieces of the entire course, functional areas, and only focus on those ones that you think you are still A, less comfortable with, or B, have more weight on your exam. Time yourself when you're answering test questions. Plan on around a minute or so a question. I think that gives you a good timing. Try and take some of the materials we provide you and stand in front of a mirror and see, could you teach them yourselves? If you open a slide, could you talk about it? Could you talk about it the way I'm talking to you about it? Not parroting me, but actually knowing what you speak. Your last review before your exam, like the day before, I encourage you to do a 4-hour session, and then you look at everything one last time. And the reason I want a 4-hour session is because then you're going to get sort of a prep of what it's like to sit in a 3+ hour exam setting. Take advantage of everything on Bench Prep. Look at the learning systems regularly. Use the games. You've got this amazing system. Use it, use it, use it. I do not encourage you to reread everything word for word unless that's how you cram. The night before and the day of the exam, some things to keep in mind. Don't eat odd foods. You're going to be nervous enough. Don't have sort of the queasy stomach. Get plenty of rest if possible. I know that's easier said than done, but the day before, the night before, if you don't know it, come on. Don't drink too much fluids before the actual exam, and let alone alcohol, because while you'll get restroom breaks, your time doesn't stop. So just keep that in mind. If possible, take the night off before and just relax, do something you would normally do, go see a movie, have a dinner, let your brain kind of rest. A marathon runner doesn't run 10 miles the night before a run. Go to the center, your Prometric center, before your exam. Like go the day before if you've not already done it, to make sure you know where it's at. Walk in, look at it, look where the restrooms are, look at the lockers they have for you, things like that. The morning of your exam, before that, maybe do one last hour of glancing at things. Maybe write a list down of things you absolutely want to remember, like those keywords I gave you, or court cases that you want to have in your brain for whatever reason. Because when you get to the actual exam center, that list, once you look at it one last time, will come in handy, and I'll explain why in our next slide. When you're at the exam center, you will have odd noises. You're the person next to you will be a heavy breather. There'll be noises from above. So don't let them get you down. Even though they provide you headphones, which I encourage you to use, they get a little heavy, but you're still going to hear the cougher. It's just going to bug you. So that's why I want you to practice distractions. Don't let your brain waste on anything except taking the exam. You can bring your own headphones. Look at the Prometrics website. It explains what that looks like. They need to be in a sealed environment, things like that. There is a clock on the computer that clocks down. People sometimes get annoyed if they're not used to looking at that. So watch your clock as it goes down into your final time. It does provide you some time that doesn't count towards your exam, to practice the functions on the exam. There's a cross out function, which means you can put a line through the answers you don't believe are the correct answers, A, B, and D, for example. You can highlight parts of the questions that are meaningful to you, keywords. You can answer all of the questions. You can go back and look at all of your answers. You can mark answers you want to go back and look at, and then select go back and look at my marked answers. Or you can skip answers, don't answer them, and then select go back and look at my questions that I did not answer. So there's multiple ways that you can do that. But remember, answer your questions before you finish, because you get no credit for not answering them, and you won't be dinged for the wrong answer. As I mentioned, you can take a bathroom break, but your clock doesn't stop clicking. It keeps counting down, and when you come back in, you might get in line behind someone else, and you might have to wait a couple minutes because they have to recheck your ID. Bring the appropriate ID. I think most of the centers need 2 IDs. Go to the website and look. Have nothing in your pockets, folks. They'll make you empty your pockets, pull up your pants legs, pull up your sleeves, get rid of large bulky jewelry. They really want to make sure there's no chance of filming things or cheating in any way. You have a locker you can dump things off. They'll give you a key on a wristband. You will be sitting in half cubicle environments, so you're kind of private, but you do see people to the left and right. There are proctors who walk around and sometimes stand in back of you. Mine stood in back of me for like a half hour, and I honestly thought she thought I was cheating. And then you get 2 papers that are like whiteboards, and these whiteboards allow you to write things down. So remember I said before going in, have a sheet of things you want to remember. Look at that sheet before you go in. You can't bring it in with you to the exam. Then when you sit down, immediately write down, just data dump anything you want to remember on those whiteboards. Perfectly legal. You will get your results right away. I believe that HRCI is doing that now. Your conditional pass and your conditional not pass or fail. It'll tell you right away, and it'll even give you a printout. About 6 weeks later is when then they'll send you the final results. The results never change, folks, so your pass is your pass, and be excited about it. And lastly, you will likely get a first few questions that you're like, I have no idea. You'll be cussing my name. You'll be cussing bench prep. You'll be wishing you became an accountant. About question 10 or 11 in, you'll start to feel the flow. You'll start to say, okay, I'm being a nervous Nelly, and you'll be able to go back and you'll know what you're doing. You'll be solid. So don't get nervous. It's normal. And then lastly, before we open it up to questions from myself and Scott, so be ready for anything you want me to say on content-wise, I just want to say to all of you, you are already winners for devoting your time and your efforts to studying and practicing and using your bench prep system to become stronger HR professionals. You are a stronger HR professional. We at Bench Prep want you to become certified. We believe you can. Keep in mind, though, the pass rates are not 100%. If this was a 100% pass rate exam, there'd be no value to it. So the likelihood that someone you know might not pass, it's possible, right? If that does happen, if you're one of those people who do not pass this time, the pass rate for retaking a test goes, anecdotally much higher. So keep that in mind. But ultimately, what I say to every one of you, when you're 95 years old, you're sitting on your rocking chair and you're looking back at your certification life and your professional life and your personal life, you are not going to reflect on, did I have these letters next to my name? You are going to reflect on the impact you made as an HR professional. That doesn't change with letters next to name. So try and take the pressure off. We want you to get this. You can get it. But the bottom line, anybody who judges you based on a few letters after your name, are they really worth having in your life? Focus on the impact you made and the relationships you built in your career, and you're already a winner, and I believe you all are at this point. So on that note, I'm going to see if there's any general questions, and then if they're outside of content, Scott's going to take it back in our last couple of minutes here. So let me just glance here. All right. Victoria, I'm not prepared right now to break down all of the different sort of training room seating. I will tell you that the one I hear that pops up a lot is the chevron seating. What you want to remember is there's different ways you set up a classroom as to get the most bang of the type of training. So I would just, take 2 or 3 minutes yourself and anyone who's worrying about that, and just, go back to our materials or let your fingers do the Googling, and it just gives you basically, would you do a soft skill training in this environment, a computer training in this environment, and what do they look like? The only one I've ever heard tested on the actual certification exam that's been reported back to me is the chevron seating. And that chevron seating is the one that has, and I can't, my hands are doing it, you all can't do it, but it's almost kind of like a V. You got two sides with a aisle down the middle, and then they're kind of V'd up looking at the presenter. And that chevron seating is primarily used when you're doing computer-based training. If I had a little more time to prepare, I could probably walk you through all the others, but I think in the meantime, if you go back and just say, what type of training is best in this environment, and then what does that look like? But honestly, I've heard chevron tested on the actual certification exam. Can I do my keywords again? Yes, I'm going to pull up my list real quick just so I don't miss any. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, the words I stated, some keywords. Communication. You always want to be a good communicator, so it's always the right answer. Alignment. Are we aligned with the strategies and goals of the organization? Strategic. Are we thinking strategically? Are we acting strategically? Training, providing training to all, providing comprehensive, non-discriminatory training. Senior executive buy-in. That trumps everything. If your executive management, your management in general are not bought into a project or program, it's likely to fail. Quick corrective action. In other words, once we recognize something isn't working, let's fix it and fix it quick. And then lastly, culture. Always addressing, do we have a culture that speaks to who we claim to be, our mission, our vision, values supported? Those are my keywords. And then I think, you're very welcome. I think I've covered any of your outstanding questions. So at this point, you are welcome all there. I'm going to hand it back to Scott and the team and let them answer any final questions and let them do the wrap up. But everybody, congratulations on your efforts till now. Stay focused. You can do this. Scott, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. This is Scott from Bench Prep back on. So before I go ahead and answer questions, I want to, of course, thank John just one more time for being, Bench Prep's HR expert. We call him that. You call him that. He does an awesome job of leading these webinars for us. So thank you so much, John. We really appreciate you being with us today and every day. What I'll do right now is I'll answer any questions that you might have as to the bench prep technology or the platform. Just a reminder now, the webinar is being recorded. You can find that recording online in the bench prep platform. All you need to do is go to the lessons section of the course and scroll all the way to the bottom. Does anyone have any other questions about bench prep system, technology, anything like that? All right, well, it sounds as if no one has any questions. The chat seems to be pretty empty. If you do have a question, go ahead and just type it in right now, and I'll make sure to get to it. For everyone else, thank you again for attending. This is the last of the webinars in the spring webinar series. We'd love if you can connect, follow, like Bench Prep HR on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Just search Bench Prep HR. We'd love to have you join our community online. As John mentioned, best of luck studying with all that you're doing. We know it can be hard. It might feel as if it's time-consuming. But we think that, at the end of the day, if you put in the effort, you'll be able to do great. So good luck with all of your studying. Question about the summer webinar. So as of right now, we're not planning on having a summer webinar series, but we are looking to develop that fall webinar schedule right now. We'll make sure to announce that to everyone. We'll push a notification within the online course. For now, you certainly have access to all of the old webinars. They're all recorded. You can see and watch the videos, listen to the audio in the online system. All right, well, it seems as if there are no other questions. So once again, I want to thank John for hosting with us today. I want to thank all of you for joining us. Keep studying. Good luck on your road to certification. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Bench Prep. We'd be happy to try and help answer them, make your process as easy as possible. I am going to end the webinar right now. So thank you all again so much. And we'll be back later on. Take care.